I think we could start. The sicha is the second sicha of this week's parsha, Parsha Emer, in the sicha Chelik Yud Zayin. The sicha talks about the psukim that deal with the Isur of Chodosh. You know there is a din that before the second day of Pesach, when they brought the Korban Emer, you're not allowed to eat from the new crop. Grain that grew, the things that grew that year, you have to wait till after bring the Emer, and then you could eat it. And eating it before is the Isur of Chodosh. Chodosh means eating the new crop, and you have to wait till after the Korban. And the Posik, the Rebbe quotes the Posik here from where it says in this week's Parsha, the Lechem, the Koli, the Carmel, which means Lo Seichelu, which means you should not eat bread, parched grain flour, or parched kernels. You cannot eat from the new crop. At Haviachem es Korban, until you brought the korban, that's the korban Eimer that they brought on the second day of Pesach. So you're not allowed to eat chodosh, which means in all the places that you live. That's the wording of the posik. Is Rashi Mefarish? Rashi explains. He quotes from the posik the two words b'chel meshvei seichem, in all the places that you live. Those are the words that he brings down in the Dibur HaMaschal, in the beginning of the words from the posik. And Rashi explains it like this. What does B'chel Mishvei Seichem mean? The literal translation is in all the places that you live. But Nichleku B'chachmei Yisrael. The Yiddish Chachamim, the Chachamim, our Chachamim, argued about it. Yes, Shalom D'mikan, Shachodesh Neig B'chutz Loretz. Some learned out from here that the Torah is telling you that even outside of Eretz Yisrael, this Isur of Chodesh applies. From the word B'chel Meshvei Seichem is in all the places where you live. Wherever Yidden live, wherever a Yid lives, has to keep the Isur of Chodesh. So that means that even in Chutz Loretz, outside of Israel, it applies. Yes, Shemrim, some say, Libo el Lamet, Shalei Nitztav al Chodesh, Shalachar Yerusha v'Yeshiva, Shekov Shevacholkum. The second opinion says, some say that that's not what it means. The Isur of Chodesh only applies in Eretz Yisrael. So what does the Posik mean, B'chel Meshvei Seichem, in all the places that you live? It means that in Eretz Yisrael itself, it only started, they were commanded on this Isur of Chodesh only after they inherited Eretz Yisrael and they settled, after they conquered it and divided it. So B'chol Meshvei Seichem doesn't mean in all the places that you live. It means in Eretz Yisrael when you live there already, meaning when you're settled already. These are the two opinions. So first the Rebbe says, Dos was Rashi da b'chlal mefares an gebet B'chol Meshvei Seichem l'chure. Why b'chol is there a need for a pshat here? We all know the klal that Rashi doesn't explain unless there's something not understood. If everything makes sense, Rashi doesn't have to say anything. So here, the reason why Rashi has to explain what it means is because the l'chure is a tai sheifachi. L'chure, there's no need for it. It's a very simple pshat. What the pshat b'chel meshvei seichem? In alle erte wo you besetzt sich, in all the places where you settle. Wo es nor sein, wherever it should be. It's a simple pshat, wherever you live. Nochme, you go more. B'chel meshvei seichem steht by noch kame mitzvahs. The same expression, b'chel meshvei seichem, is written by many other mitzvahs. Umehem farun der posik. And some of them even before the posik that we're talking about now. By ruba the ruba fazei is Rashi nit mefarish. And in most cases, Rashi doesn't explain what it means. Why? Because it's obvious. B'chel meshvei seichem means wherever you live. Hein farvos darf es Rashi mefarish sein do. So why does Rashi have to explain this here? B'chlal. So we're not even going into what he explains, how he interprets it. Why does he need an explanation b'chlal? So the Rebbe says, that we understand. Why? Because a b'chol meshvei seichem steht free in Parshat Tzav, and the same expression b'chol meshvei seichem, which is written earlier, and the klal is that whatever Rashi wrote before, Rashi expects the people to remember it. So Rashi writes in Parshat Tzav, which is before Parshat Emer, by Isur for Nachilas Dam, when it says that you're not allowed to eat blood. So there it says also b'chol meshvei seichem. Zokt Rashi. So Rashi says, since not eating blood is an obligation, a din on the person, has nothing to do with the land. Neheg is b'chol mishavos. That's why it applies to wherever you live. It has nothing to do with Eretz Yisrael. So when it says over there b'chol meshvei seichem, Rashi gives a klal that any mitzvah that has nothing to do with the karka, with the land of Eretz Yisrael, has to do with the person, with the body. That applies all over. And since the Isur of Chodesh is not an Isur just on the person, it's because of the land. that the land, the things that grow from the land, you can't eat before the Korban Eimer. Und noch mehr, bei Pashtus ist der Risse von Chodesh verbunden mit dem Eimer, was ist Reishes Sicha von Ksira, von dem Moritz. The Pashtus, the Isser is connected to the Korban Eimer. You have to wait for the Korban Eimer. Till then, you can't eat it. And the Korban Eimer has to be Reishes Ksircha, and the first grain that you cut were Ksira from the land. So obviously, the Isser of Chodesh is connected to the land. So we push it based on that Rashi, that anything that has to do with the land is only in Eretz Yisrael. So here it would seem that the Isser of Chodesh, which has to do with the land, is only in Eretz Yisrael. Zog the Ribe Rashi as Alpha became Yesh Shalom to Mekan Shachodesh Neig B'chutz Laretz. Even though it would seem that it only should apply in Eretz Yisrael because it's something that has to do with the land, Rashi says no. Some learn from these words that it means even in Chutz Laretz. The Tait from Chomesh V'Seichem is Pshutik and Mashmoyim. That the first opinion holds, the first opinion written in Rashi holds that the Pshat of Chomesh, all the places you live, you settle, is simple Pshat. And the Posek Kumt Akelenen as Chodesh Tayetzem and Aklal. The Posek tells you that Chodesh is an exception. Chodesh is Chayvas Karka, even though it's the obligation of the land, has to do with the land. From deswegen is es Neig B'Chomesh V'Seichem Eich B'Chutz Laretz. Nevertheless, it applies all over. So Rashi has a reason to say it, because if not for Rashi, we would assume that it doesn't apply in Chutz Laretz. So Rashi says it. But we have to understand, the Balda the Posh of Pshat Chomesh V'Seichem is with the Erste Pirush V'Yesh Shalom Tu. Since the simple words Chomesh V'Seichem is like the first Pshat, Ale Mishoves Eich Chutz Laretz. The first one says it's also in Chutz Laretz. And that's the simple meaning of the words Chomesh V'Seichem. But what brings Rashi Eich im Zweiten Pirush? Why does Rashi bring the second shot? And Chomesh V'Seichem meant not Eretz Yisrael. And the second shot is that Chomesh V'Seichem means only Eretz Yisrael. Ober lacha yushiv yeshiva. But it means after you settle. But what up yanal can ordnit in Pashtas Aksuvim. In simple pshat of the Posik, there's no reason to say. The Posik says Chomesh V'Seichem, so it should mean all over. So when Rashi brings that pshat, that regardless of the klal, that if it has to do with the land, it only applies to Eretz Yisrael. Here it's different. Here the first opinion says that it means even Chutz Laretz. And that fits to the simple pshat. That fits to the simple taich of the words. So why does Rashi bring a second pshat that it means no, it means in Eretz Yisrael, but only after you settle? Because if it first fits to Pshutish Mikro, so we don't even care what it's in Halacha. We know the Klal that Rebbe learned that pshat, according to the simple pshat of the Pasuk, sometimes could be different than Halacha. Simple pshat here in the Pasuk is that it means B'Chomesh V'Seichem. So why does Rashi have to bring another pshat? See, why Rashi has to B'chlal tell us that, even though the simple words means all over, because you might have thought, because of the previous Rashi, that since it has to do with the land, maybe it's not all over. It's only in Eretz Yisrael. So Rashi says, no, I want you to know that in this case it means all over. Fine. That's all he should have said, and that's the simple words. The kasha is noch stark, and the kasha is stronger. Shingiret fil mol. Rebbe said, I spoke many times. B'shas Rashi is meisiv and zogt frier. Eider hebt am afares an posik. Ad dozayne Franz zwei oder etliche perushim. If Rashi gives an introduction that in this inyan there is two pshotim, or if there are more, three pshotim, because usually when Rashi brings two pshotim, he doesn't give an akdama, I have two pshotim. He starts off with a pshat and then says another pshat. Not so often does Rashi give an introduction. He should know there are two pshotim here. Why does Rashi do that? Usually he doesn't. Why does Rashi do this? So the Rebbe spoke many times, maintained the mitzvah, and he wants to stress, as in derech pshat, and in the pirushim shkulim, that in simple pshat, both pirushim, both pshotim are equal. Und das, was is magdem ein pirush war im zweiten. So why does he say one before the other? Is there far, weil wir können doch nicht schreiben beide pirushim the basachas. You can't write two pirushim at once. In other words, the Rebbe learns the klal like this. If Rashi brings two pirushim, the first one is the better pshat, in derech pshat. The first one is closer to the pshat, and that's why that comes first. And then the second one is also needed because the first one has something lacking, so we need the second one. The second one has something lacking, we need the first. But between the two, which is the better one? Always the first. What does Rashi do if there are two pshatim and they're both equal? They're both mamish equal. How does Rashi do that? If we write one before the other, we'll think that that's the better pshat. So Rashi has the eitzeh. He gives an introduction. I have two pshatim here. The reason he tells us that Hakdama is to tell you that in this case, the two pshatim are equal. So so in our case, with them was Rashi is Meisi v'Magdim Nichluku b'Chachmei Yisrael. When Rashi gives the introduction that there's an argument here, is there oisen zu sagen? He means to say, at der zweite Pirish lalamet shel nitztav al chodesh lachrush yeshiva is nicht weiter von der Pshat to der erste Pirish. He's trying to tell us that both Pshatim are equal. The second Pshat, which says that B'chelmish v'Seicha means dafker it's Yisrael, but that means only after you settle, is just as good in Pshat like the first one. Like the one that B'chelmish v'Seicha meant all mishaves eichutz loretz. That means all the places, even chutz loretz. That's the first Pshat. And the second Pshat, Rashi is telling, is just as good in Pshuta Shel Mikra. Ulchure, afil mazalonim and as Rashi da bringen dem zweiten Pirish. The farba leiten Eshne Pirish is nicht verstandig. Maybe you could say, the question the Rebbe asked first was, why does he bring a second shot? The first shot fits to the word, stick with it. So the Rebbe says, I feel if we're going to say that Rashi does have a reason to bring a second shot. And when does Rashi do that? When there's something missing in the first. Maybe there is something missing in the first. And what's missing? You might think, after you bring the first shot, that it means that it also applies in chutzlotz all over. Yeah, it's not so poshut. It doesn't fit to the klal. The klal is that wherever it has to do with the karka, it only applies that it's Yisrael. So maybe one could say that's why Rashi needs a second shot. But still, how could you say that the second shot, which tells you b'chol mesh v'seichem, does not mean all over. It means in Eretz Yisrael only, but if it's acha Yerusha v'yeshiva, is ausgehalten in der Chabshat, Punkt für der Pirish HaPoshet, nafel b'chol mesh v'seichem, was azei zeh sein Pirish b'chol mokim. And that's just as good as the first shot, which says that it means all over. And the first shot is the one that fits more. So even if you need a second shot, it shouldn't be the same level in pshat like the first. And Barasha giving that introduction that there is a machlekes here tells us that the first pshat, the second pshat, is just as good as the first. And the first pshat, which means all over, is what the way it's in all the psukim where it says b'chol mesh v'seichem normally means that. So the first pshat fits to what the word b'chol mesh v'seichem means all over, and it fits to these words here, even in this pasuk. So why the second pshat just as good? The beer is that the explanation is like this. Earlier in the parsha, steht früher in unser parsha, the same parsha we learn about the Isser to castrate an animal. So the pasuk says, "Uba'artzachem leisasu." The pasuk says, "And in your land you shall not do it." Is Rashi of them a farish? Rashi explains. The kachnema ba'artzachem. That's why it says ba'artzachem in your land. Lerabis kol asher ba'artzachem. To add anything that's in your land. But maybe it doesn't mean that. Maybe it means to tell you that only in Eretz Yisrael there is a Isser of Sirus. So Rashi says, you can't say that the pasuk means that the Isser, the prohibition of castrating an animal, is only in Eretz Yisrael. Not castrating has nothing to do with the land. It's something that has to do with a person can do. Anything that has to do with the goof is in Eretz Yisrael and Chutz Loretz. And this Isser of Sirus, which has nothing to do with the land, is obviously in Chutz Loretz also. So when the pasuk says Ba'artzachem, doesn't mean that. It means to tell you something else. Zetman der Funsav, and that's a Rashi that's written before. So we know that Rashi already. So we know that klal that Rashi gave. So we have to remember it. So we see from that as the klal kol cheves aguf neheg is bein boras v'chutz loretz. This rule that if it's something that has to do with the person, not with the land, is a klal that applies in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz Loretz, is azay stark. That rule is so strong. Azay in pshute shel mikro is meant to leave them mafkia the word ba'artzachem was naposhet and. It's so strong, that rule, that because of that rule will change the simple pshat in a simple word. The word said, the pasuk says by this Isser of Sirus, uba'artzachem leisa, so don't do it in your land. Which if you look simple pshat of the words, it means it's only also in your land, and then it's Yisrael. But because this klal is so strong, so important, that anything that has to do with the person is not only in Eretz Yisrael, is so strong that we could change the simple pshat because only zayin stirat zum klal. It shouldn't contradict the klal. Und do is neither fall. The Rebbe is going to add even more. And here, sometimes we have a drash that Rasha brings that we need it for some reason, and Rasha says that it's a drash that fits to the posik. Do is neither fall. It's not a case as suliba shverikait in derech hapshat Bengt Rasha Drash was his Miyashev Divri Amikr Doba Dir Elefan. Rasha made a cloud that whenever he brings a drash from Chazal, it has to fit Miyashev Divri Amikra. It has to explain the words of the posik the way the posik says. But here it's not like that. Here, when Rasha says that by this case of Sirus, it doesn't mean Dafkin Eretz Yisrael. It's not that Rasha brings a certain drash which is put into the posik. When Rasha the mountain that the Pirish and Cholash of Arzachem is Adrash, Rasha doesn't say that when we say the Pshat and Cholash of Arzachem doesn't mean that it's Yisrael. It's not from Adrash. Und Zeichen Tafilu nit, as der Pirish is genommen von Razal. He doesn't even mention that it comes from Chazal. It comes from the Gemara, Medrash. Nor sagt es na signe from Pshat. He says, he poshet explains the simple Pshat of the Posik. Leiten derech Pshat bites it the Taich of Arzachem. Rasha says that in simple Pshat, the word of Arzachem, which normally means in its land, in your land, and at Yisrael. Here it changes. Nicht wie sein Pirish Aposhet, not the simple pshat. Kedei is only sein bestiert zum Klau, kol chefes aguvachul. In order it shouldn't contradict the rule that anything that has to do with the body is not dafkin at Yisrael. So we see how strong this Klau is that Rasha feels that this could change the pshat to the simple words and not even telling you that it's a drash that makes a change. No drash. Rasha says this is the pshat. Der Fund ist verstandig, und geht zum zweiten Chelik vom Klau. So we understand from here that the same applies to the second half of the rule. This half of the rule is that whatever is chayvas haguf, whatever is something on the person, is not only in Eretz Yisrael, but the second half was as a chayvas karka ein hegezel borders. On the other hand, if it's something to do with the land, it's only in Eretz Yisrael. Der klal darf master sein umetum eichvan in derech hapshat, dafür it's to leave them biting the taich von avort, nicht is an posher the taich. That just like when the first thing, anything is chayvas haguf, is all over, is enough strong that cloud to change the meaning of a word, of a simple word. The word Ba'artzachem means your land. Because of this cloud, we change it. Same thing to the other side of the cloud. That anything that has to do with the land is only in Eretz Yisrael. So that's strong enough to change, even if the Pasuk doesn't say that. Even if the wording in the Pasuk seems to be differently, that applies in Chutz La'aretz too, but the cloud, that if it has to do with the land, only applies in Yisrael, is so strong, it'll change the Pasuk. So we will apply it in Arinya. Rasha can't say it by Genugen mit dem Pirish as Chodesh is neig b'chutz la'aretz. Rasha can't be satisfied with the first pshat. The kasha was simple pshat that says b'chol mishvasechem. He's all over. He's chutz la'aretz. Rasha says that. Fine. So why does Rasha need a second pshat for? And not only that second pshat is just as good as the first. So the Rebbe says, now we see why Rasha can't be satisfied just by bringing the first pshat. That here it means b'chol mishvasechem all over in chutz la'aretz. Was his heipach from the klal? This is the opposite of the klal. As chayvas karka in hegezel borders. That if it's an obligation on the land, has to do with the land, it's only in Eretz Yisrael. And we said before that that klal is so strong that it will change the simple pshat of a pasuk, like the first half of the klal. Und der Rebbe bringt den noch a pirush. So therefore, even though first he brings this pirush, he brings another pirush. In b'chol mishvasechem. That means lacha yerusha v'shiv. It's only Eretz Yisrael, but it's the pasuk tells you it has to be after you settle. But their pirush. This pshat hagamer liegt in tazein diverte bechel mishvasechem. It doesn't fit so much to the words bechel mishvasechem, which means in all your places. Is a rabbi nit bestiret zum klal now. It's not a contradiction to the klal. It fits to the klal. That it has to do with the karka, with the land. It's only in Eretz Yisrael. Al derech pirish and alle ba'artzachem leisaso, like we said before by Sirus, which the pasuk says ba'artzachem leisaso, which means in your land. And Rasha says because of the klal that anything that has to do with the person, not the land, is also in Chutz La'aretz. So there changed the pshat in the word Ba'artzachem. Same thing here. The second pshat is that even though it says B'chel Mishvasechem, which simply means all over, but because of the klal that if it's karka, it's only in Eretz Yisrael, it changes the pshat. So that's what Rasha brings because the klal is so strong. So now obviously the question will be, so then only bring the second pshat. The second pshat fits to the klal. And when it fits to the klal, where we see from Rasha, you could change the pshat of the word. So Rasha should have touched. Means only that it's so, but it means Acha Yerusha V'Shiva. Why does it bring the first? So the Rebbe Azay, aber eich der Pirish is niklati, but even this doesn't fit so good. But the Rebbe brings Rasha Eden Pirish, and Mekan Shachodesh Nei B'chutz La'aretz. That's why he brings the first pshat. Also, that Chodesh is also in Chutz La'aretz because this second pshat has a problem. What's the problem? Aber Chol Mishvasechem steht bei Kame Mitzvahs. Expression in all your Meshavis, in all your place that you live is written by many mitzvahs. Und umetum Meint es as the chiyuv is chutz la'aretz. And all over, it means that the chiyuv, wherever the pasuk is talking about, is also outside of Eretz Yisrael. All over where it says that. Kum tui, so it comes out as der pirush b'chomesh v'seichem do ados meint lacha v'yerusha v'yeshiva. So the second pshat that we said, that here it means Eretz Yisrael, but it means only to tell you that it's after you settle, but it doesn't mean all over chutz la'aretz. Is a yetzem in aklal from alle erte wo steht b'chomesh v'seichem. Is an exception to all the places where it says b'chomesh v'seichem, which means even chutz la'aretz. If I bring Rasha, the Meshna pirush, Rasha brings the first pshat. The first pshat fits to all of the word b'chomesh v'seichem all over. So now the Rebbe says, "With der Mitte verstandig, wie die zwei Pirushim für Rasha seine Shkulim in derech Pshat." Now we'll see how both Pirushim and Rasha are equal. As far as the pshat of the pasuk, they both are equal. They both are good, and they both have a problem. That's why each one needs the second. But they're both equal problems, and they're both not one is. But they're very interesting. The Rebbe says it. In beide Pirushim is dodi zel b'shverakait. In both shotim, the same problem. As b'chomesh v'seichem do is a yetzem in the cloud. The word b'chomesh v'seichem is an exception to the rule. Both of them, whichever way we learn, it's an exception to a rule. Late Neshna Pirush. According to the first brother, that means also in chutz la'aretz. Either chiyuv or chodesh b'chutz la'aretz an oisna from the klal. Eichlet pshuta shulika kanal as chayvas karka in the neges b'oretz. According to the first brother, that means also chutz la'aretz doesn't fit, is an exception to the rule. The rule is that anything that has to do with the land is only in Eretz Yisrael. And here the pshat says that it means all over. So it's an exception to the rule. Und the zweiten Pirush is that tight from chodesh v'seichem hayetzem in a klal. That according to the second pshat, that means dafke Eretz Yisrael, but lachar Yerusha v'yeshiva is also an exception. An exception to what b'chomesh v'seichem, the meaning of the words means all over. Von dem Teich wie die Wörter in alle andere Wörter in Teire, wo es meint in alle Meshavas chutz la'aretz. It's an exception to those to these words that all over where it says b'chomesh v'seichem means all over, even the chutz la'aretz. So the first pshat is an exception to a klal, the second one is an exception to a klal, and one is not better than the other. The Mela, that's why Rasha gives an introduction. I have two pshat, there's a machlekes here, and he wants to tell us, you should know that both pshatim are equal. Not one is closer to the pshat. Each one has the same problem, and that's what brings it. But then the Rebbe says, since now we're saying that they're both mamash equal, they both could be learned pshat and posel with the same problem, so they're both equal. Cannot Talmud Mamulach fragments or Talmud that's smart could ask a kasha, not a kasha, to ask trying to understand. Was eine die Svares von die Bali Plukte, was like einem kum de chomesh v'seichem lernen as chodesh neid b'chutz la'aretz, like the zweiten nor ba'aretz lach Yerusha v'yeshiva. What taka made one of the chachamim learn this pshat and that pshat? See, if one is better than the other, you could say that he felt this kasha is a better kasha. You could see. But if they're both equal and they both have the same problem, so what is taka? Why would one choose to say it means even the chutz la'aretz, and it's against the klal that dover shebekarka is on Eretz Yisrael, and the other one says it means also Eretz Yisrael, and it's a go, and it's achli shev'yeshiva, and it's against the word of b'chel mishv'seicha. Daito Rasha the Asbori in them duchnutzen dem loshen nichlaku b'chachma Yisrael. So Rasha is telling you, using the words nichlaku b'chachma Yisrael. Chachma Yisrael argued. Nit with the loshen Rasha harogil nichlaku Rabbi Seinik. Usually Rasha is a machlek chachamim. He says Chachma Yisrael. What is trying? Why is he called Chachma Yisrael? The mitzvah Maram as Rashi is trying to hint to us. At the Nichlaku is verbunden mit limud pshat aksuvim Rabbi Seina. If you say just Rabbi Seina means our Rebbes. Our Rebbes are teachers who taught Torah. So they argued in how you learn the posik. So Rashi is saying no, this is not stam how they learn the posik. Nur mit zwei Shittes wie zu verstehen und abschätzen die Tchunes und Gefühlen von Niden. There's a difference in how you look, how you evaluate the feelings of a Yid. So it's not stam. A Rav is a teacher. Teacher teaches you. A Chocham is somebody who could understand something. And it's somebody who could see deeper. So the Chachamim are Chachma Yisrael. Chachma Yisrael means the Chachamim, they see inside inside the Yisrael, inside the Eden. And the Machlekes here is based on the psychological, Torah, halacha, psychological thing of the way the Chachamim look at Eden, as Kidul Kamen, as he'll explain, and based on the way each one sees what's inside a Eden, what is the feeling of a Yid, that will bring him to say the pshat that he said. Kabir and them. What does this got to do with the feelings of Eden? Very interesting. Jeden Korban darf der wecken bei einem Menschen a bestimmten Hergeschnafschi. When you bring a korban, every korban has to bring out in a person a specific feeling. Behesem to them teichen to the korban fit to what the korban is about. The dogma, for instance, by korban chatas v'oshem, a korban that you bring for a sin, it's supposed to awaken in a person a gefühl for charot and tshuva, regret and tshuva. And even in Derech HaPshat, the Rebbe so far is not talking about Pnimis Hazek. Talking Rashi, in Pshat. In Pshat, because Rashi and Chumash brings the idea that by a korban you have to have a feeling. So by a chatos, you have a feeling of tshuva. Korban teido, heido, it's a meibishn, it's a thanks to Hashem, it's a feeling that you have. The Rebbe fordert sich by the akrove from korban, not nur the gashmatik akrove, that's when you bring a korban, it's not only that you actually bring the physical animal, nor ebelosh and Rashi, that you have no sleep at Hashemayim, Rashi brings it, that you have to have your kavanah to the Eibishter. And the kavanah of what? Of whatever each korban is. And das is not after by a korban yochid. It's not done by a korban that the individual brings. Obviously, if someone brings the korban chatas for his aveda, obviously he has to have. But even if it's a korban tzibur, eicha korban tzibur da faruis rufen by jeden yochid, was is doch atel von tzibur dem regish behesem zum korban. Even when it's a community korban, every individual who's part of the community, it has to arouse within this person a feeling fitting to what the korban is all about. Ledugma, he says, for instance, by the kabbalah tzibur like machaper of avedas hayochid. There are certain Kabbalah Sibur that forgive for Avedas that people did. Now, Order 21, the Rebbe gives an example. Shnei Seir Chatas Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, there's 2 Seirim that you bring. That's supposed to forgive for the Avedas that all the Yidden did. So it's a Korban Sibur. Dar the Yochid Charot of Mafmchet. Even though it's a Korban Sibur, but every Yochid has to have Charot on the Chet. That means that even the Korban Sibur is made to bring out within every individual a certain feeling or of regret or thanks, or a certain feeling. The soon is a verstandig binyan. So from that we'll take an arinyan. Which korban are we talking about here? The isur von essen chodesh, the prohibition of eating chodesh before you bring the korban, was ein tama poshet is. What's the simple reason? A poshet pshat. Why is there an isur to eat from the new crop before you bring the korban neimer? Is kedei reish is k'tzirchos l'zayin korban neimer. The Pasuk says that the first korban that you bring, the first cutting of the crop that you cut, should be for the Eibishter. So the first thing has to be the korban meimer. After the korban meimer is done, then go ahead and lick your own. What? So that's a korban tzibur. It's one korban they brought, but every person had to have a feeling that came along with that korban meimer. A feeling of what? So we just said the feeling of what the union is. Darf arusruf ma'iden de akorav argosha as dem reishis von alle seine Sachen muss man bringen Hashem. That's supposed to bring out a feeling in a yid that the first has to be a korban. The first thing of anything that I have has to be given to Hashem. Und erst dennoch kann sein Teichel, then you could eat it. So the korban aimer is supposed to bring out by eating this hergish, this feeling that the first thing is to the Eibush. That's why I can't eat anything, any chodosh, unless I bring there's a korban brought first. That's the feeling. Die Balder wird aus der Eimer wird gebracht nur from Ktsira, since the korban aimer could only be brought from wheat, barley actually, that you cut in the land. The kotzir from Eretz Yisrael has to be cut in Eretz Yisrael. Certain special fields they had, but if those fields were not available, you could do it anywhere. But anywhere in Eretz Yisrael. So if the cutting of this Eretz Yisrael, you dos me'ere, nor the Eden for the Mekemis, Vanem and Meg bring the Meimer, Eretz Yisrael. So who will get this feeling? People in Eretz Yisrael, because that's where you could bring the Korban Eimer. So they have connection to the Eimer, because from there, whether you bring it from his field or not, but you bring it, it's a field that you're able to bring. So it arouses within the Eden this feeling that we said before. What's the feeling? That you realize that the first thing is to the Eibishter. So the Eden that live in Eretz Yisrael, it will affect them. They will feel it. It makes sense. Because from there you bring the Korban Eimer, and the Chodesh is because of the Eimer. So don't eat this because you didn't bring the Korban yet. So brings them this feeling. Stellt the Shaila, but then there's a question. Wie wird dort die Hakore? As Reish ist Ksirchem Kerz am Eibishten, ausgerufen bei Eden, was gefunden sich in Chutz Loretz. Now, how will this affect Yidden who live in Chutz Loretz? They want the Yidden also to feel that the first thing has to be to the Eibishter. But it has nothing to do with them, because you can't bring the korban from them anyway. Was man say, Kotze bringt man nicht kein Korban Neimer, you don't bring Korban Neimer from them. How will they get the feeling of this hergish that everything is the Eibishter, but the first goes to the Eibishter? So that's what they're worried about. In them, voran zwei Shitas v'Chachmei Yisrael. So there are 2 Shitas, Chachmei Yisrael. In other words, they have to look into a Yid and see what will awaken in his feeling, which way will go. It's actually like the Rambam says that certain dinim, to the Chachamim instituted, he said, Yardu Chachamim l'seiv daite shalodom. The Chachamim went deep down. They were the greatest, use the simple word, psychologists, Torah psychologists, but psychology in the nature of a person. What will awaken a person to have this feeling? And there's two opinions, two approaches. Ein shita is one opinion, is one shita is as eich zei zayin oser b'chodesh. You know how we'll make it happen by them. The Torah wants them also to be also b'chodesh. We bald they will nicht torn essen chodesh bis them tog when we bring them to Yisrael the Meimer. Since they'll know that they can't eat chodesh till they bring the korban Meimer in Eretz Yisrael, that they'll say their mon and no Meimer zayin zutzukum to the Rakora now. So that will also awaken them to come to this recognition as Reish is geherzt to the Meibishter. The first thing always it belongs to the Meibishter. Chotz mezeh kotze bringt man the Meimer, even though you can't bring the Eimer from their field, from their cutting. But still, they also have the Isser. So it connects them also to this idea that you can't eat till there's a korban. And that will awaken them also this feeling that everything is the Eibishter's, and Mela the first goes to the Eibishter. A zweite Shita is as Adarabbe. Another Shita is on the opposite. Der Weg zu erwecken sie, dem Hergish, is nicht durch Asen sehen Chodesh. The way to awaken them, this feeling, is not to prohibit Chodesh to them. Nor Adarabbe. Those Gufe, was die Felder von Eden Bechutzlor, I need in them get from bringing them in. The fact that you tell them that you guys are not in that category of bringing the Eimer, and the Mela need the Isa for Chodesh. You can't bring the Eimer from you, and not only that, you don't even have an Isa Chodesh. That they're vekt in Zay, the Anerkennung von Zay Shvala Matzah. What does it make them feel? Something wrong with us. There's something we don't have that schus, so it makes them feel what they're missing. Need Zay Roy to the Akrova Eimer, that they feel that they're not deserving of bringing the Eimer. B'Meila nit Isa Chodesh. They don't deserve even Isa Chodesh. So when they realize that, when the Akora for Zay Shvala Matzah, but Bazay Aruis Rufen, this recognition of their low level will awaken within them at shuke, a desire. Abazay dar zayin beyeser says that you feel what the Eimer Ruf Aruis Badiden from the Yisrael. They have to have this feeling of the korban Eimer that brought out the Badiden. So even more. Look how bad we are. We need that more. So by not having the Isser Chodesh, he says, will awaken in them such a feeling that we're missing it. And B'Meila, they'll know that they have to strengthen it because they're missing it. So this explains why why each one says what, because each one is from the Chachomim. Chacham is what looks into and sees, and Chachma Yisrael looks in, and each one has his opinion in this way. This is a L'chur in Derech Hapshat. And that's why there are these two, and they're both equal. They're both equal. Side mitzvah, the way of the Pshat and Posik, both are Yetzim and Aklal, and both equal also in each one is interested in bringing out the Hergesh of Yidden to what the Korban Eimer and the Isser Chodesh are supposed to do. Based on this, we could explain the Rebbe says the Pnimi Sinyon. Now we're talking about Chassidus. Favos Rasha is Magdim, then Pirish as Chodesh is Neig Chutzlor, as Fard and Pirish as Chodesh is Neig Norboritz. Why Rasha first brings the Pshat that Chodesh is there in the Chutzlor, it's outside the Eretz Yisrael, before the second Pshat. The L'chura, we're not looking for a reason. The Rebbe says, Chodesh Vaniden Didan, even though in this case, I Beide Pirush and Shkulim in Derech Hapshat, as we said before, the reason Rasha wrote the first one first is not because it's better. He just couldn't write two at the same time, so he wrote one. When Rasha is Magdim ein Pirish from Zweiten, the Farva meken doch nicht schreiben zwei Pirush in Basachas Kanal. And the reason he writes one before the other, because he can't write them together. So why does the Rebbe say I have a B, or why the first one is the one that says that in Chutzlor there is also Chodesh? So deswegen still, the Baldas jeder Inyan in Teir is bediuk, since everything in Teir is exact. He's moving as if he's do am ein Tam, a kaponim b'pnimisyonim of them as Rasha is Magdim ein Pirish from Zweiten. But still, I'll use the words that the Rebbe doesn't use. The Hashgacha Prot is that one came first. So Rasha didn't write it to Kavonim because that's a better pshat. But the bottom line, that's his first. So it's like Hashgacha Prot. So if it's first, there must be, in Pnimius, there must be some reason why that's first. And now we'll understand it. Why? The chilek zwischen the Tzeyefanim in Zeirufton in Eden, the difference that we see these two ways, how we influence the Eden to have the feeling of with the Korban Eimer and the Chodesh is supposed to awaken. The difference is like this. The first way he said, how do we make him feel that? Let them also have us Isser Chodesh. So that'll bring him into the thing and they'll also feel it. The Nem, the Meichel, the Guf and Nefesh Abamis. That who will it affect? The eating, right? It's because I can't eat the Chodesh. So the effects that influence the person who's eating, and that is with the body. It's a bodily thing. So it's the Guf, Nefesh Abamis. The fact that we can't eat something, who does it affect? Not the neshama. You can't eat, you feel, your body feels it, so it affects your body. That's the first way. The zweite Reifen, the second way how you make them feel, durch sein Mushlof und Akrova Seimer and Nisr Chodesh, that how do you awaken in them? By telling them that they're not included in the Isser. They don't have the Isser. They don't have the Imer, and they don't even have the Isser of Chodesh. Was ruft da ruhig die Tschuke zu der Heime sich und Zukunft, wie es sagt zum Gefühl, was sie da bei dem Eretz Yisrael, which as the Rebbe said, will awaken within them a feeling, a desire to elevate themselves and be similar to the Eretz Yisrael, to have this feeling. That doesn't affect the body. We're talking here about a feeling. It affects the Nefesh Lekis. Was by him is daf, was by him dafke kumt uf or dit shukets in the Tzalaven. The Nefesh Lekis is the one that gets you a shuket to become better, to a desire to elevate. There's a pasuk that says Ruach Odam Ha'ilei L'maylo. It's only the Ruach of an Odam, the spirit of a person, always goes up. It says the difference in the person and a behemah. A behemah looks always down. The person always looks up. The same thing it says, the Nefesh HaBahamis looks down, and Nefesh Lekis looks up. So who gets this feeling of looking up and becoming better? Nefesh Lekis. So it comes out of the first shot is something, they affect the same thing, but the first one is through the Nefesh HaBahamis, by not letting him eat Chodesh. It'll make them part of the thing of the feeling of the Korban Aimer. And the other one is through the Nefesh Lekis, will affect Nefesh Lekis. So which one comes first? Up to that is verstandig to say in Rashi. Now we have to say in Rashi. The erste Pirish, the beginning, the first shot, which means as a remes in Pnimis HaInyonim, is Hascholas Aveda, the beginning of Aveda. When you want to affect a person to reach a certain level, how do you start? So the first thing you start is when the Nefesh Guf and Nefesh Habamis are not betalk from. When you start, you're still not in the high madrege. So your Guf and your Nefesh Habamis is still strong. So what do you got to do to get the person closer? Do things that have to do with the Guf, with his Nefesh Habamis, because he still has it. And then to the zweite Stufe, you could come to the second level, then you come to the second period, to on the Nefesh Lekis. You could do things to affect the Nefesh Lekis. So that's since the first shot has to do with Nefesh Habamis and second Nefesh Lekis, that's why Al Pichsidis, the first shot came first. Now the Rebbe goes another Nekuda here. The chilek between the two Pirush and Rashi, the difference between the two Pirush and Rashi makes another difference, but the Rebbe didn't touch till now. So far, we're saying the first Pirush tells that Chodesh is also in Chutz La'aretz. Also, the second Pirush is that Chodesh is only in Osir in Eretz Yisrael. But let's look at this. So how does the second Pshat teach Chelmish v'Seichem? That in Eretz Yisrael Gufe, it only started after you settle. Now, the first Pshat doesn't learn that Pshat. So according to the first Pshat, when did the Isser Chodesh start? Not waiting for them to settle in Eretz Yisrael. As soon as they entered, as soon as they had land, they have to do it. It worked all over. But he doesn't, the first Pshat doesn't teach B'chomish v'Seichem after Yerush v'Shiv. So that's what the Rebbe says here. The chilik zwischen the zwei Pirush Rashi is not nur in the Chutz La'aretz, to dort is Negis Chodesh, not only where the Chodesh is in Chutz La'aretz also. Nor in Eretz Yisrael Gufe. In Eretz Yisrael itself, there is a difference between the first and the second. See, there is a Chodesh in Eretz Yisrael, hat sich angegeben, erst lach Yerush v'Yeshiva. Is it that in Eretz Yisrael itself, it only started after it settled? That's Kipirish HaBeis, that's how the second Pshat learns. Or the Reichfar Yerush v'Yeshiva, the erste Pirish. Or it has nothing to do with settling. According to the first shot, it started right away. Was B'chol Bish V'Seichem kumt leitim lama shachodesh neig b'chutzlar. B'chol Bish V'Seichem does not come to teach you that it has to be after yeshiva, after they settle. It comes for something else. That tell you it's chutzlar. So what's the pshat? So what about? So there's no din according to the first pshat that has to come after Yerush Yeshiva. So there's another machlekes here which we didn't touch upon. According to the first pshat in Eretz Yisrael, it was right away, and according to the second pshat, it was only after Yerush Yeshiva, after you settled. What's the pshat? Like in Friedrich and Beer, it was einverstandig. According to what the explanation before, it'll be understood. Wie die zwei Chilukim seinen abhängig in den anderen. We'll understand why this difference between the two pshatim depends on the other difference. Weil der chilik in Aveda zwischen den zwei Shittas wir fahren now. Der chilik in Aveda is nicht nur bescheichet zu dienen Chutzlor, das nicht in der zu dienen Israel. What did we say before is the difference, the first and second pshat? The first pshat deals with the Nefesh Habamis. How do we get the Yidden to get closer to the Eibishter and have this hergish is by telling him not to eat. Chodesh Nefesh Habamis. That's the first pshat. The second pshat has to do with Nefesh Lekis. So if it goes on Aveda, the Aveda B'Yid has to start with the Nefesh Habamis to work on that, and then you go weiter. That difference is the difference in the second in the second machlekes also. The erste shita Pirish, the first shita, which is the first shot, was is matkish beike der Avede zu den Nemen im Guf und Nefesh Vamis von Aiden. That the first shot tells you that we have to work on affecting, influencing the Guf, the Nefesh Vamis. Halt, he holds. As Eichen Eretz Yisrael is the Akor as Reishes Ksichem Gehert Lashem. Even in Eretz Yisrael, that to recognize that the first of your cut, which means the first of everything, belongs to Hashem. According to the first shot, it's not because of the korban Eimer, it's more because of the not being able to eat. In other words, according to the first shot, right away, as soon as you went into Eretz Yisrael, you had this din. Because the first thing, the Isra of Chodesh was there. Why? Because the Isra of Chodesh has to do with Nefesh Bamis. So even if he holds that it's all over, but even in Eretz Yisrael, it had to do with Nefesh Bamis. All over, he said it has to do with Nefesh Bamis because it's Isra to eat. In Eretz Yisrael, the Isra is also there. That in Eretz Yisrael, also, we want to start off Nefesh Bamis according to this shot. Und der Riber hat sich der Isra Chodesh für Schita so angegeben, gleich an reinkommen in Eretz Yisrael. That's why that Isra started right away when they came to Eretz Yisrael. Noch Eidim hat sich besetzt, Bikvias, Yerushalayim in Eretz HaKodesh. Before they settled in Eretz Yisrael. What does that mean before they settled in Eretz Yisrael? Eretz Yisrael is Eretz HaKodesh. When you settle in Eretz Yisrael, that means you're in a level of Gedusha. But the first shot holds that you have to we're affecting Nefesh Bamis first. So in Chutz La'aretz, we affected by telling him not to eat. In Eretz Yisrael also, before you became Kodesh, before you settled, you already have to work with the Nefesh Bamis. So it's before you settled in Eretz HaKodesh, but Dani says Haseder Anhogas Kedusha. If you're settled already, then you're living in Eretz HaKodesh. So your level is a holy thing. Kedushas Nefesh Elokis. It's a Kedusha that has to do with your Neshama. So he says you don't have to wait for that. We have to start right away. And what do we start right away with the Isra Chodesh? Because this, what we said before, that we have to start by affecting the Guf and the Nefesh Bamis. That's in the beginning. So the first shot holds that we have to deal with Nefesh Bamis first, holds that even in Eretz Yisrael, you have to start when the Nefesh Bamis is still strong. Don't wait till you get to Eretz HaKodesh, you settle and you become part of a Kedusha. Do it right away, because that's his shita. His shita is we got to work the Nefesh Bamis. And his shita is das Cholas Aveda. The zweite shita, but according to the second one, as the Yikev was bringing Tiden to the Rakora now, the Akrova from Neimer, according to the second shita, what brings a Yid to see this? Not so much the Isra of the eating Chodesh as the Korban Eimer, and you realize that you have to bring the Korban Eimer first. So there it's more with the Korban. And what is that? Was the Nefesh Elokis, the Korban that's Hatu Nefesh Elokis. So according to that pshat, which means really not the word that pshat, that level, can sich das Eshtuf to lach Yerushalayim to reach a level of the we deal in Nefesh Elokis. You can't do it as soon as you come into Eretz Yisrael. You have to settle in Eretz Yisrael and become part of Eretz HaKodesh. And then you could deal with Nefesh Elokis, and then you could go say the Korban Eimer tells you all kinds of things that affects the Nefesh Elokis. So here we see that according to Chassidus Al Kaponim, the second machlekes also fits to the first machlekes, what their way of looking of what helps him. First the Nefesh Elokis, the Nefesh Bamis, and then the Nefesh Elokis, and that's what this is the first shot, and this is the second shot. Now the Ma'aser Apel, what about Chodesh? Is Chodesh Neigen Chutz La'aretz or not? So this is a whole big. When the Rebbe said this, Parshas Emer Tovshin Lamed Zayin, the Rebbe said that Lapel Mamish, those years it wasn't so popular. Now Chodesh is popular. But those years Chodesh wasn't popular, and the Rebbe says that most people are not careful with Chodesh. And he says that even though the Alter Rebbe says that you should be careful, the Alter Rebbe himself in the same place where he writes, but Lapel Mamish, this Pasha meaning that people are not careful. I remember the expression the Rebbe used then, that most people aren't careful, and I have to say, he said, that if there would be a person careful, the whole world would know about him. In the way things are, that everybody who does some special hidur makes it sure everyone knows. So we would all know about it. We don't know. Assuming that most people are not careful. Okay, but since then, other people are careful, but what in Lubavitch is, like upon him, they weren't careful. It seems more that B'chal the Chassidim, not Chabad, B'chal the Chassidim also are not careful in Chodesh. In Chutz La'aretz, we're talking about. And it's all based on the Bach. The Bach holds it doesn't apply. And they base it on the Chesed for the Blin. They say he was Einikol of the Bach, he said, and he passed like the Bach. So they're not careful. the Litvische were more careful on more, but not everybody, mostly not. But there were some now. Most other people are careful. They even say there was once the Knesset Gdela of Aguda was in Europe, and there was the Gerer Rebbe, Dimmer Emes was sitting there at the table. Next to him was Chaim Ezer, the Rabbi Vilna, and he gave Shirayim some cake or something, which was not Yoshan, it was Chodesh. So he gave Chaim. That's what they say. Chaim Ezer a piece of cake, he wouldn't take it. So we don't know exactly because there are stories that seems differently. But Lepel seems like we're not so much. But I'm not saying what to do. But here, this is the source of the machlek, is how we learn pshat in this pasuk.
But you see, by the Welt today, even the Ashkochas, they ask if it's Chodesh.
Right, they write on the package just like they write the Yisrael. They write Yoshan. No,
in Eretz Yisrael, you have to be careful with it.
Sorry.
In Eretz Yisrael, Chutzlar, not careful.
Not careful, but there's a story that someone was going to Hungary, came to the Tzemach Tzedek. What should he do? He heard that in Hungary they're not careful of Chodesh, but he was careful. So Tzemach Tzedek told him that since those places, the Mokim, they're not careful, you could rely on them. It's mashman that otherwise they would be careful. So I don't know how Chassidim were, but the way the Rebbe said it then, it seemed like the Rebbe like saying that the meaning, and the Alter Rebbe says, "Nispasha that meaning that people aren't careful." Shem Tov said, I don't know, these are things which are not so clear. Shem Tov said that he said the godless of the Bach, and because the Bach passes like that, I think he said that the godless of the Bach is, I'm trying to remind myself, that when it says when the tzaddik passes away and goes to Gan Eden, he has to pass through Gehenim. That's the derech. So by the Bach, before he passed away, I think he said 60 days or 40 days, they close the fire in Gehenim, so when the Bach has to go by, it shouldn't be any heat for him. That's how holy the Bach was. And he passed like that. But something that I think about Shem Tov. I didn't look into this,
but Chassidim are usually very noyig and makbid in Chassidim mitzvahs to do the Lefnimishus Adin.
But here there's
a beflossach of Bach and the Alter Rebbe.
But then the Alter Rebbe really says that you should be careful. He just says that the meaning is not careful. That people are not careful. But the Rebbe says, but you see, the Alter Rebbe says you should, and nevertheless he says the meaning is not. So, with Lepel, it seems like.
What did the Rebbe do? We don't know.
I don't know. I don't know how would you know it? I don't know when they gave him cake. If he asked if it's.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
They have to ask Bel Eunuch.
Yeah. Can't ask him.
I'll ask Zelgson.
Yeah. Okay.
I shkoyach.
Yeah. Cool.